Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the shower and wrapped herself in a towel, droplets of water trailing down her back as she padded across the small apartment. The clock on her nightstand showed 6:30 a.m. Another workday was about to begin. She had been working at Congressman Peter Walsh's office for just 3 months, and each morning still brought a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Her apartment was modest but neat, located in a brick building filled mostly with other young professionals trying to make their way in Washington. Photos of her family lined the bookshelf, smiling faces from New Hampshire that reminded her of home. A framed diploma from Northeastern University hung on the wall, a communications degree that had finally landed her this job after dozens of applications. The morning news played softly from her laptop as she dressed in a simple gray skirt suit. The television hosts discussed the president's upcoming address to Congress scheduled for that evening. Karoline listened with half an ear as she applied minimal makeup and pulled her blonde hair into a neat bun. These big political events were always interesting to watch, but they existed in a world far removed from her daily tasks of answering phones and sorting mail. Major security preparations are underway for President Trump's address tonight, the news anchor said as Karoline slipped on her low heels. She glanced at the screen, watching footage of security barriers being erected around the Capitol building. It would be her first time experiencing a presidential address since moving to Washington, even if just from her couch with a bowl of microwave popcorn. The January air bit at her cheeks as she walked the 6 blocks to the congressional office building. The capital city was already buzzing with activity. Black SUVs with tinted windows whisked by, and tourists gathered despite the cold, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone important. Security personnel seemed to be everywhere, their faces serious, as they prepared for the evening's high-profile event. Karoline swiped her ID badge at the entrance and nodded to Bill, the security guard who always greeted her with a warm smile. The office was already humming with activity when she arrived, unusual for this early hour. Staffers hurried between desks with folders and coffee cups in hand. "Morning, Karoline," said Greg Patterson, a fellow junior staffer. "Big day today." "Because of the address?" she asked, hanging her coat on the rack by her desk. "Yeah, and because half the office is attending. The congressman gets 2 tickets for guests in the gallery." Karoline nodded, imagining the senior staffers in their finest clothes, witnessing history in person while she watched from her apartment. She booted up her computer and began sorting through the morning's emails, organizing them by urgency as she had been trained to do. At 9:15 a.m., Melissa King, the office manager, appeared at her desk. "Morning meeting in 5 minutes," she said, briskly. "The congressman wants everyone there today." The small conference room was crowded as all 12 staffers squeezed around the table. Congressman Walsh, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, stood at the head of the table. He looked more tired than usual, the responsibilities of representing his district visibly weighing on him. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "As you know, the president's address is tonight. I've been asked to bring key staff members." He glanced down at his notes. "Unfortunately, Alan has come down with the flu." Alan Morris was the congressman's legislative aide, a position several steps above Karoline in the office hierarchy. "We suddenly have an extra seat," Walsh continued. His eyes scanned the room and, to Karoline's surprise, stopped on her. "Karoline, you've been putting in good work these past months. Would you like to attend in Alan's place?" The room fell silent. Karoline felt her cheeks flush as all eyes turned to her. This was unheard of, a junior staffer being invited to such a prestigious event. She struggled to find her voice. "Yes, Congressman, thank you." "I would be honored," she finally managed. Walsh nodded. "Good. Dress formally. Meet us in the lobby at 7 p.m. sharp." Then he moved on to other matters as if he hadn't just made Karoline's heart nearly beat out of her chest. After the meeting, Karoline returned to her desk in a daze. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the phone to make her first constituent call of the day. "Did that really just happen?" Greg whispered, leaning over from the next desk. "You must have really impressed someone." Karoline shook her head. "I have no idea." I've just been doing my job. Well, now you get to see the circus. From the inside, Greg said with a grin. Better than watching it on TV while eating ramen. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Karoline made calls, drafted letters, and helped visitors, all while her mind raced with thoughts about the evening ahead. During her lunch break, she slipped out to a nearby department store and spent an irresponsible amount of money on a navy blue dress that looked professional but special enough for the occasion. At 5:30 p.m., she closed her computer and rushed to the women's restroom with a small bag containing her new dress, a pair of modest pearl earrings that had been a graduation gift from her parents, and a makeup bag. The bathroom was crowded with other women preparing for the evening, some of them familiar faces from other congressional offices. Karoline changed quickly in the stall, then stood at the mirror applying a slightly more dramatic version of her everyday makeup. Her hand still shook with excitement. "First time attending?" asked an older woman next to her, applying lipstick with the steady hand of someone who had done this many times before. "Is it that obvious?" Karoline asked with a nervous laugh. "We all had a first time," the woman said kindly. "I'm Dorothy, Senator Baker's chief of staff. Karoline Leavitt, Congressman Walsh's office." "Ah, Peter Walsh. Good man," Dorothy said. "A word of advice, take it all in. These moments, they're what make all the long hours worth it." Karoline nodded gratefully and finished getting ready. At 6:55 p.m., she stood in the lobby, smoothing her dress nervously as she waited for the congressman and his senior staff. Walsh arrived precisely at 7 p.m., accompanied by his chief of staff, Jack Morgan, and communications director, Diane Foster. The congressman looked sharp in a dark suit with an American flag pin on his lapel. "Ready for this, Karoline?" he asked with a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be, sir," she replied honestly. The walk to the Capitol was short but felt momentous. Security. Checkpoints were everywhere, with armed guards checking and rechecking credentials. Karoline presented her special pass, feeling a surge of pride as she was waved through alongside her much more experienced colleagues. The Capitol building glowed against the night sky, its dome illuminated dramatically. Inside, the hallways buzzed. With activity, senators, representatives, staffers, and security personnel moved with purpose. Karoline tried not to stare at the famous faces she recognized from television. "This way to the gallery," Jack said, guiding her toward a staircase. As they climbed, Karoline took a deep breath. She thought of her parents back in New Hampshire, who would be watching on their living room TV, completely unaware that their daughter would be in the same room as the president. She thought of her political science professor who had encouraged her to pursue a career in Washington despite her humble background, and she thought of herself just this morning, never imagining that by nightfall she would be witnessing history in person. At the top of the stairs, they emerged into the gallery overlooking the House chamber. Karoline gasped softly at the sight. Below, the grand chamber with its elevated speaker's rostrum looked both familiar from television and yet entirely different in person. Members of Congress were already finding their seats, greeting each other across the aisle with handshakes and backslaps. "Your seat is here," Diane said, pointing to a spot in the second row of the gallery. "We'll be just down there." As Karoline settled into her seat, she felt a strange sense of destiny. Something told her that this night would change everything, though she couldn't possibly know how or why. She simply knew with absolute certainty that when she left this building tonight, she would not be the same person who had entered it. The House chamber filled quickly as the time for the president's address approached. Karoline sat straight in her gallery seat, taking in every detail of the historic room. Below, members of Congress chatted in small groups. Some laughed and shook hands across the aisle while others stayed firmly with their party colleagues. The room buzzed with energy and anticipation. Karoline spotted familiar faces she had only seen on television. Senior senators with decades of service, freshmen, representatives still finding their way, and cabinet members in their designated seats. She resisted the urge to take photos with her phone, wanting to appear professional rather than like an awestruck tourist. A woman in her 60s sat down beside Karoline, dressed in an elegant burgundy suit. "First time?" she asked with a knowing smile echoing what Dorothy had asked earlier in the bathroom. "Is it that obvious?" Karoline replied. "You have that look of wonder." "I remember my first time," the woman said. "I'm Linda Powell, wife of Congressman Powell from Michigan. Karoline Leavitt. I work for Congressman Walsh." "Ah, Peter is wonderful. How did you land this seat?" "Usually these go to senior staffers, or donors." Karoline explained about Alan's flu and her unexpected invitation. Linda nodded approvingly. "Sometimes the best opportunities come by chance," she said. "Just watch how the members react to different parts of the speech. You'll learn more about politics tonight than in a month of staff meetings." Their conversation was cut short as a voice announced, "Madam Speaker, the President's Cabinet." The chamber quieted as cabinet members filed in. Next came the Joint Chiefs of Staff in their decorated uniforms, followed by the Supreme Court justices in their black robes. Each entrance received respectful applause. The Sergeant-at-Arms's voice then boomed through the chamber. "Madam Speaker, the President of the United States." The room erupted in applause as President Trump entered. Republicans stood immediately, clapping enthusiastically. Democrats rose more slowly, offering polite but reserved applause. The president moved confidently down the center aisle, stopping frequently to shake hands and exchange brief words with members who had positioned themselves along his path. Karoline watched with fascination as the political theater unfolded before her. The president reached the podium and handed copies of his speech to the vice president and Speaker of the House, as tradition dictated. The applause continued for nearly 2 minutes before the speaker finally gavelled for order and formally introduced the president. As the speech began, Karoline paid close attention not just to the words, but to the reactions they provoked. When the president spoke of economic achievements, Republicans stood and cheered while Democrats remained seated. When he mentioned bipartisan infrastructure goals, members from both parties applauded. It was like watching a complex dance where everyone knew their parts. "We have created 7 million new jobs," the president announced proudly. "Unemployment has reached the lowest rate in over half a century." The Republican side of the chamber erupted in cheers. Karoline noticed Congressman Walsh nodding with approval. She had helped compile some of those economic statistics for the office's constituent newsletters, and seeing them highlighted in this grand setting gave her work new meaning. An hour into the speech, the president's tone shifted. He looked up from his prepared remarks toward the gallery. "Tonight we are honored to have some very special guests with us," he said, his voice growing softer. "Seated in the gallery are John and Mary Anderson." Cameras turned to an older couple, seated across the chamber from Karoline. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed. The man sat stiffly in his dark suit, his jaw clenched with emotion. John and Mary's son, Staff Sergeant Ryan Anderson, served 3 tours in Afghanistan, the president continued. 6 months ago, Ryan was leading a patrol when his unit came under heavy fire. Without hesitation, Ryan placed himself between the enemy and his wounded comrades. The chamber grew completely silent. Members of both parties sat in respectful attention. Ryan was hit 3 times but continued returning fire until reinforcements arrived. His actions saved the lives of 4 American soldiers, but Ryan made the ultimate sacrifice for his country. The president paused, looking directly at the grieving parents. Ryan died as he lived, a hero who put others before himself. Karoline felt a lump form in her throat. The story of this brave young man hit her harder than she expected. She thought of her own brother who had considered joining the military after high school. The president continued, his voice now resonating with emotion. Ryan's parents have turned their grief into purpose. They've established a foundation to help veterans struggling with PTSD and the families of fallen soldiers. The camera showed John Anderson's face, stoic yet filled with unmistakable grief and pride. Mary Anderson wiped tears with a white handkerchief. Their son gave everything for the country he loved, the president said, extending his hand toward the couple. And America will never forget his sacrifice. The entire chamber rose in a standing ovation. Democrats and Republicans alike turned toward the Andersons, their applause thunderous and sustained. Some members wiped tears from their eyes. And then, without warning, something broke inside Karoline. The sight of this grieving couple, the thought of their son's sacrifice, the rare moment of unity in the normally divided chamber, it all collided within her. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Linda Powell noticed and gently patted Karoline's hand, offering a tissue from her purse. Karoline took it gratefully, trying to compose herself. But the emotions wouldn't stop flowing. This wasn't just political theater anymore. This was real human experience, real sacrifice, real grief and resilience on display. As the applause continued, Karoline noticed a camera panning across their section of the gallery. She quickly dabbed at her eyes, hoping to regain her professional composure, unaware that her emotional reaction had been captured on film. The president moved on to other topics: border security, trade agreements, healthcare reforms. Karoline tried to focus, but her mind kept returning to the Andersons and their son. Politics suddenly felt less abstract, less about polling numbers and talking points, and more about real people's lives. The speech concluded to thunderous applause from the Republican side of the chamber. As the president made his exit, shaking hands along the way, members began to file out. The historic evening was coming to an end. "Well, what did you think?" Linda asked as they gathered their things. It was... Karoline searched for the right. "Art is powerful, different from watching on TV." "It always is," Linda nodded. "When you're in the room, you feel it all differently." As they made their way out of the gallery, Karoline spotted Congressman Walsh waiting with Jack and Diane. She thanked Linda for her kindness and hurried over to her group. "There you are," Walsh said. "What did you think of your first State of the Union?" "It was incredible, sir," Karoline replied honestly. "Thank you for the opportunity." "You seemed quite moved during the Anderson segment," Jack commented. "I spotted you on one of the monitors." Karoline felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm sorry if that wasn't professional. It just hit me unexpectedly." "Don't apologize," Walsh said firmly. "This city could use more genuine emotion, not less. We're here to serve real people with real struggles. Never forget that." As they walked through the Capitol corridors toward the exit, Karoline noticed people looking at her, curiously. A reporter she recognized from Fox News glanced her way twice. She assumed it was because she was walking with a congressman. Outside, the January night air was bitingly cold. News crews were set up on the Capitol steps, conducting interviews with departing members of Congress. Camera lights created bright islands in the darkness. "I'll see you all at the office tomorrow," Walsh said, heading toward a waiting car where he would give interviews to local stations from his district. Karoline said goodnight to Jack and Diane, then began her walk home, her mind replaying moments from the evening. She had no way of knowing that by the time she reached her apartment, her tearful reaction would already be circulating on social media, or that when she woke up tomorrow, her life would be irrevocably changed. Karoline's phone alarm blared at 6:30 a.m. as usual. She reached over to silence it, still groggy from a restless night. The events of the presidential address kept replaying in her mind, especially the moment she had lost her composure. She hoped no one besides Congressman Walsh and his senior staff had noticed her emotional display. After a quick shower, she checked her phone and froze. 27 missed calls, 62 text messages, over 100 email notifications, and her social media apps showed numbers she had never seen before. "What in the world?" she whispered, opening her text messages first. The most recent was from her mother. "Honey, call us as soon as you wake up. You're all over the news." Another from Greg, her coworker. "OMG Karoline, you've gone viral. CNN, Fox, everyone is showing your crying face." With shaking hands, she opened Twitter. The top trending hashtag was #Teary Staffer. When she clicked it, thousands of posts appeared. And there she was, her face captured in high definition, tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to the president honor the fallen soldiers' parents. Some comments were cruel, mocking her emotional reaction. But surprisingly, many more were supportive. This is what real patriotism looks like. Teary Staffer reminds us politics is about people, not parties. Don't know who she is, but Thierry staffer showed more genuine emotion than most politicians do in their entire careers. Karoline sat on the edge of her bed, stunned. Her private moment had become public property overnight. She didn't know whether to be mortified or amazed at the reaction. Her phone rang. Melissa King, the office manager. "Karoline, where are you? The office is being flooded with calls about you." I just woke up. I had no idea this was happening," Karoline stammered. "The congressman wants you here immediately. We're setting up a meeting to discuss how to handle this." "And Karoline? The White House has called twice already." "The White House?" Karoline nearly dropped her phone. "Why would they call about me? Just get here as soon as you can," Melissa said before hanging up. Karoline dressed in record time, opting for her most professional outfit, a black pantsuit with a light blue blouse. She applied makeup with extra care, knowing cameras might be waiting. As she left her apartment building, she was startled to find 2 news vans parked outside. "There she is," a reporter called out, rushing toward her with a microphone. "Ms. Leavitt, can you tell us what moved you to tears during the president's speech?" Karoline ducked her head and quickened her pace. "No comment, please," she said, firmly, remembering office protocol about not speaking to press without authorization. She hurried down the street, but the reporters followed, shouting questions. Thankfully, a coffee shop she frequented was just ahead. She ducked inside, where the owner, Frank, immediately recognized her situation. "Back door's open," he said quietly, nodding toward the kitchen. "Take care, kid." Karoline slipped through the kitchen and out the back alley, managing to lose the reporters. She took a longer route to the congressional office building, keeping her head down and walking briskly. When she finally arrived, security had been increased. "Bill, the usual." Guard gave her a sympathetic look. "Quite a morning for you," he said as he checked her ID. "We've had to turn away a dozen reporters already." Inside, the office was chaotic. Phones rang constantly and staffers huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. When Karoline entered, conversation stopped as all eyes turned to her. Greg was the first to approach. "The crying girl herself," he said with a grin, but his tone was kind. "You're famous, Karoline." "I don't want to be famous," she replied, her voice small. "I just want to do my job." Melissa appeared, looking harried. "Karoline, conference room now, the congressman is waiting." Karoline followed Melissa to the large conference room, her stomach knotting with anxiety. Inside, Congressman Walsh sat at the head of the table, flanked by Jack, Diane, and several other senior staffers she rarely interacted with. A laptop was open in front of them, displaying what appeared to be news coverage. "Ah, there she is," Walsh said, rising to greet her. To Karoline's surprise, he was smiling. "The most famous member of our staff." "Sir, I'm so sorry," Karoline began. "I never meant to cause a distraction or embarrass the office." Walsh waved away her apology. "Embarrass us? Karoline, you've given us the most positive press we've had in years. People are calling you the heart of America." He gestured to the laptop where a split screen showed her tearful face next to the Andersons. The headline read, "Young Staffer's Emotional Reaction Captures Nation's Heart." "I don't understand," Karoline said, slowly taking a seat. "Why does anyone care that I cried?" Jack, the chief of staff, cleared his throat. "In a political climate where everything seems calculated and cynical, your genuine emotion struck a chord. Both sides of the aisle are praising your sincerity." "The White House has called 3 times now," Diane added. "The president's communication team wants to speak with you." Karoline felt lightheaded. "With me? Why?" "They didn't give details, but we assume they want to capitalize on the positive press," Jack explained. "We've arranged for you to go there at noon." "The White House. Today," Karoline stated flatly, trying to process this information. "We've also had requests for interviews from every major network," Diane continued. "We're holding them off for now, but eventually, you'll need to speak publicly." Karoline nodded numbly. Just yesterday, she had been a nameless junior staffer. Now she was headed to the White House and fielding interview requests. "What do I say when I'm there?" she asked. "Just be yourself," Walsh advised. "That's what resonated with people." your authenticity. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Diane coached Karoline on possible questions and talking points. A staffer was dispatched to buy her a new blouse when coffee was spilled on hers. Her parents called and she assured them she was fine, just overwhelmed. At 11:30 a.m., a car arrived to take her to the White House. Karoline sat in the back seat, watching the familiar Washington landmarks pass by, feeling anything but familiar herself. The White House security screening was thorough. Her ID was checked multiple times and she passed through several checkpoints before being escorted to the West Wing. The hallways were narrower than she expected, lined with historical photographs and busy staffers who barely glanced her way. She was led to a small waiting area outside an office labeled Communications Director. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as she waited. The door opened and a woman in her 40s emerged, dressed in a crisp red suit. "Ms. Leavitt, I'm Susan. Miller, White House Communications Director. Please come in." Susan's office was tidy and professional, with a window overlooking the rose garden. Photos of her with the president and various world leaders lined one wall. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Susan said, gesturing for Karoline to sit. "I'm sure this has been a whirlwind day for you." "That's an understatement," Karoline admitted, then quickly added, "Ma'am." Susan smiled. "No need for ma'am. Susan is fine." She leaned forward, studying Karoline intently. "Do you know why we asked you here today?" Karoline shook her head. "Not really. I'm still not sure why my reaction has gotten so much attention." "Because it was real," Susan said simply. "And real is rare in this town." She picked up a remote and turned on a wall-mounted television. "Look at this." The screen showed a montage of clips from the previous night, members of Congress checking their phones during the speech, others looking bored, some even dozing off. Then came Karoline's tearful face, fully engaged and emotionally present. "The contrast is striking," Susan continued. "In an age of manufactured moments and calculated responses, you gave us something genuine. The president noticed it immediately when his team showed him the footage this morning." Karoline felt her cheeks flush. "The president has seen me crying?" "He has, and he was impressed." Susan placed a folder on the desk between them. "We've been looking for ways to connect with younger voters, to show them that politics still matters, that it can still touch hearts." She tapped the folder. "We'd like to offer you a position, Karoline, as a press assistant in the White House Communications Office." Karoline stared at the folder, unable to process what she was hearing. "But I've only been in Washington for 3 months. I don't have the experience for a White House position." "What you have is more valuable than experience," Susan replied. "You have authenticity. We can teach you the rest." The folder contained details of the position: salary, benefits, responsibilities. It was a junior role, but still a significant step up from her current position. And it was in the White House. "This is happening so fast," Karoline said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Politics moves quickly," Susan acknowledged. "Windows of opportunity open and close in an instant. Right now there's a window open for you. The question is, will you step through it?" Karoline looked out at the rose garden, sunlight playing across the winter-dormant bushes. Yesterday she had been answering phones and sorting mail. Today, she was being offered a position in the White House because she had cried on national television. Life could change in an instant, she realized. Sometimes all it took was being in the right place at the right time and being unafraid to show your true self. She turned back to Susan, decision made. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'll accept the position." 2 weeks after accepting the White House position, Karoline stood in her new apartment surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The place was smaller than her previous apartment, but located just 6 blocks from the White House. The rent was higher than she could comfortably afford, but the shorter commute seemed worth the extra cost. She picked up a framed photo of her family and placed it on a shelf. So much had changed so quickly. She had said goodbye to Congressman Walsh's office, where her colleagues threw her a small farewell party. Walsh himself had given her a letter of recommendation so glowing it made her blush when she read it. "Your first day at the White House," she said to her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Don't mess this up. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress with a white blazer, conservative but not boring. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She wanted to look professional, but not like she was trying too hard. The media attention had died down somewhat over the past 2 weeks, but she was still recognized occasionally on the street. She had done one brief interview with her hometown newspaper in New Hampshire, but had otherwise avoided the press, following Susan Miller's advice to maintain a low profile until she started her new role. Karoline arrived at the White House security gate 30 minutes early. After showing her new ID and passing through multiple checkpoints, she was escorted to the communications office in the West Wing. The hallways buzzed with activity. Staffers hurried past with folders and tablets. Phones rang constantly, and there was an energy in the air that made her heart beat faster. Susan greeted her with a quick handshake. "Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Karoline replied, trying to sound confident. "We'll start with orientation and paperwork, then I'll introduce you to the team," Susan said, leading her to a small office. "This will be your workspace. Not much, but it's in the White House." The office was indeed tiny, just enough room for a desk, chair, and small bookshelf, but Karoline felt a thrill just being there. A window overlooked an interior courtyard, providing some natural light. The morning passed in a blur of paperwork, security briefings, and IT setups. By noon, Karoline's head was spinning with new information, passwords, and protocols. Susan introduced her to the communications team during lunch in the staff dining room. There were about 15 people, most of them older and more experienced than Karoline. Some greeted her warmly, others seemed more reserved, eyeing her with curiosity or skepticism. "Don't worry about Kevin," whispered Amber, another junior staffer, noticing Karoline's discomfort under one older man's scrutiny. "He applied for your job for his nephew. He's just salty that the nephew got passed over for the crying girl." Karoline winced at the nickname. "Is that what they call me?" "Only behind your back," Amber said with a grin. "To your face, we're all perfectly professional." After lunch, Susan outlined Karoline's responsibilities. "You'll be monitoring media coverage, drafting response statements, and occasionally helping prepare press briefings. For the first month, you'll shadow Ben, our deputy press secretary." Ben Franklin was a serious man in his 30s with thick glasses and a no-nonsense attitude. He showed Karoline to her desk and immediately handed her a stack of newspaper clippings. "Sort these by topic: economy, foreign policy, healthcare, and miscellaneous. Note any particularly negative coverage. I need it done by 3 o'clock. Karoline nodded and got to work. The task was straightforward but tedious. As she sorted through the clippings, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Was this what working at the White House would be like? Paperwork and clipping newspapers? At precisely 3 o'clock, Ben returned. He checked her work with a critical eye, but seemed satisfied. "Not bad. Now come with me. We have a press briefing to prepare for." The press secretary's office was larger and more impressive than the other spaces Karoline had seen. A team of staffers was already gathered, discussing talking points for the day's briefing. "This is the new assistant, Karoline," Ben introduced her briefly. "She'll be observing today." For the next hour, Karoline watched in fascination as the team crafted responses to anticipated questions, debated phrasing, and prepared the press secretary for potential traps. It was like watching a chess match being planned several moves ahead. "Healthcare question is guaranteed to come up after the senator's comments this morning," said one staffer. "We need to redirect to our accomplishments without dismissing concerns." "What? About the jobs report?" asked another. "Do we lead with the manufacturing growth or overall unemployment numbers?" Karoline listened intently, absorbing everything. This was what she had hoped for, being in the room where messaging was shaped, where the administration's voice was crafted. As the meeting wrapped up, Susan appeared in the doorway. "Karoline, the president would like to meet you." The room fell, silent. Ben's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "The president today?" Karoline asked, her voice squeaking slightly. "Now, actually," Susan replied. "He has a few minutes between meetings." Karoline followed Susan through the West Wing, her heart pounding. They stopped outside the Oval Office, where a secretary nodded them in. The Oval Office was more beautiful and imposing in person than it looked on television. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the famous desk, and behind it stood President Trump, rising as they entered. "So this is the young lady who moved America to tears," he said, coming around the desk to shake her hand. "Welcome to the White House, Ms. Leavitt." "Thank you, Mr. President," Karoline managed, hoping her palm wasn't sweaty. "It's an honor to be here. Susan tells me you're from New Hampshire. Beautiful state. Great people up there." "Yes, sir. Small town, called Atkinson." The president gestured for her to sit on one of the sofas, and he took a seat across from her. Susan remained standing by the door. "I watched that moment, you know," the president said, "when the cameras caught your reaction during my speech. In a room full of politicians checking their phones and thinking about their next fundraiser, you were fully present. That's rare in this town." Karoline nodded, unsure how to respond. "Why did that moment move you so much?" he asked, seeming genuinely curious. She thought for a moment, wanting to give an honest answer. "I think it was seeing the Andersons, their grief, but also their dignity, and the way the whole chamber came together to honor their son. In that moment, it wasn't about politics, it was about recognizing sacrifice and service." The president nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we need more of in Washington. People who can see beyond politics to the human stories." He leaned forward slightly. "I have a feeling you're going to do well here, Ms. Leavitt. But a word of advice? This place can change. People, and not always for the better. Don't lose what made you special in the first place, your authenticity." "I'll try not to, sir." "Good." He stood, signaling the end of their brief meeting. "I look forward to seeing your work. And tell your parents I said hello." After leaving the Oval Office, Karoline followed Susan back to the communications department in a daze. "Did that really just happen?" she asked. Susan smiled. "Presidential meetings tend to have that effect the first time. You did well." She checked her watch. "The press briefing starts in 20 minutes. You should head down with Ben to observe." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Karoline observed the press briefing from a side door, watching the press secretary field questions with practiced ease. Afterward, she helped Ben compile media reactions and prepared a summary for the senior staff. By the time she left the White House that evening, darkness had fallen. The building glowed against the night sky, its windows illuminated. Karoline paused on the path, looking back at her new workplace with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How was your first day?" Karoline smiled as she typed her reply. "Met the president. Helped prepare a press briefing. Still can't believe I'm here." As she walked toward the metro station, Karoline reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 2 weeks. From answering phones in a congressional office to meeting the president in the Oval Office, all because she had allowed herself a moment of genuine emotion. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to follow the president's advice and hold on to that authenticity, no matter how Washington tried to change her. 3 years passed quickly for Karoline Leavitt in the White House. What began as a junior position in the communications office had evolved into something much more significant. She now served as deputy press secretary, standing at the podium, herself when the press secretary was unavailable. Her rise had been swift but earned through countless late nights, crisis management sessions, and a natural talent for explaining complex policies in simple, relatable terms. On this crisp autumn morning, Karoline sat at her desk reviewing talking points for the day's press briefing. Her office, while still modest, was now larger than the closet-sized space she had started in. Photos lined her walls. Karoline with the president in the Oval Office, Karoline at international summits, and one special photo with John and Mary Anderson, the Gold Star parents whose story had changed her life. A knock at her door interrupted her preparation. Susan Miller entered, now Karoline's mentor rather than just her boss. "Ready for the congressional address tonight?" Susan asked, taking a seat across from Karoline. Almost. Just finalizing the press guidance. Karoline gestured to her notes. Hard to believe it's been exactly 3 years since I was sitting in the gallery instead of helping plan the messaging. Susan smiled. I was just thinking about that. The president mentioned it this morning in senior staff meeting. He called it your anniversary. Karoline felt a rush of warmth knowing the president had remembered. Over the years, she had earned his trust, becoming one of the staffers he relied on to translate his vision into language that resonated with everyday Americans. By the way, Susan continued, we've had a special request for tonight's address. The House Speaker's office called. They want you to attend as an honored guest. Me? Why? They're doing a segment on American stories, highlighting people whose lives represent something meaningful about our country. The president thought your journey from tearful staffer to White House spokesperson was a perfect American story of opportunity. Karoline set down her pen, touched by the gesture. So I'd be sitting in the gallery again? Full circle moment. Exactly, but this time, you'll be the one being recognized, not doing the recognizing. After Susan left, Karoline sat quietly, reflecting on the journey of the past 3 years. It hadn't all been smooth sailing. There had been intense press scrutiny, especially in the beginning. Some critics had dismissed her as just a crying girl who got lucky. Others questioned her qualifications. Late-night comedians had made jokes at her expense. The hardest moments had come when her authenticity was tested. Early on, a senior advisor had tried to script her responses down to the last word, making her sound robotic and insincere. When Karoline pushed back, insisting on speaking more naturally, she had been frozen out of meetings for weeks. It took direct intervention from the president, who had noticed the change in her public appearances, to resolve the situation. I hired you to be you, he had told her, not to be another Washington robot. There had been personal costs, too. The demanding schedule had strained relationships. She had missed her brother's wedding due to a foreign policy crisis, and dates were often cut short by urgent work calls. Her social media accounts had to be carefully managed, with even innocent posts sometimes twisted by political opponents. Yet through it all, Karoline had held on to the core of who she was. She had learned when to compromise and when to stand firm. She had developed a thick skin without becoming cynical, and most importantly, she had never forgotten that behind every policy debate were real people with real struggles, like the Andersons, who had lost their son in service to the country. As evening approached, Karoline changed into a deep blue dress for the congressional address. This time, she wasn't a nervous junior staffer, but a confident White House official. Her security detail escorted her to the Capitol, where she was shown to a special section of the gallery reserved for the president's guests. As she took her seat, memories of that first night flooded back. The energy in the chamber felt familiar, though now she understood the choreography behind it. She recognized the strategic placement of members hoping to shake the president's hand, the subtle signals between leadership, the careful positioning of cameras. From her seat, she could see Congressman Walsh, her first boss, now a committee chairman. He caught her eye and gave a small wave and proud smile. She also spotted Greg from the congressional office, now Walsh's chief of staff. So many careers had advanced. In 3 years, not just hers. The sergeant-at-arms announced the president's arrival, and the familiar ritual began. As the president made his way down the aisle, Karoline watched with professional interest, noting which members he stopped to greet, and which talking points from her briefing materials he mentioned in these brief exchanges. Midway through the speech, the president turned to the topic of American opportunity. In this great country, a single moment can change the trajectory of a life, he said. 3 years ago, a young woman sat in this very gallery, moved to tears by the story of American sacrifice. That genuine moment of emotion, captured on camera, resonated with millions of Americans tired of political theater. Karoline felt her cheeks flush as the president gestured toward her. Today, Karoline Leavitt serves as a deputy press secretary in my administration, bringing that same authenticity to her work every day. Her journey from that gallery seat to the White House podium reminds us that in America, Doors of opportunity open in unexpected ways to those who remain true to themselves. The chamber erupted in applause. Members from both parties stood, looking up at her with approval. Karoline nodded graciously, trying to maintain her composure even as emotion welled up inside her once again. After the address, at the Capitol steps, reporters gathered around her. "Ms. Leavitt, how does it feel to be recognized in the same venue where your career began?" one asked. "It feels like a reminder of how unexpected life can be," she replied honestly, "and of how important it is to remain authentic, even in Washington." "Any tears tonight?" another reporter asked with a smile. Karoline laughed. "Not on camera this time. I've learned a few things in 3 years." Later that night, after the media interviews and official receptions, Karoline stood alone on the balcony of her apartment. The lights of Washington glowed below, the monuments illuminated against the dark sky. She thought about the scared, overwhelmed young woman she had been that first night at the congressional address and the confident professional she had become. Her phone chimed with a text from her mother. "So, proud of you tonight. Your father cried when the president mentioned you." Karoline smiled. Some things had changed dramatically in 3 years, but others remained constant: family, values, and the power of genuine emotion. In her purse was a letter she had received that morning from a college student named Olivia. The young woman had written that seeing Karoline's journey from emotional staffer to White House spokesperson had inspired her to pursue a career in politics. "You showed me that you don't have to become cold or calculated to succeed in Washington," Olivia had written. "That authenticity still matters." Karoline folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box where she kept meaningful correspondence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: press briefings, policy disputes, crisis management. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply appreciate the journey. From a tearful moment in the House gallery to the White House podium, from answering phones to answering for the administration, from a young woman moved by a story of sacrifice to a public figure inspiring others with her own story, all because she hadn't been afraid to let America see her cry.